The film that I have chosen is a 1996 black comedy drama, and it is called Trainspotting. And this film is set in a poor area of Edinburgh, and it follows the lives of a group of 20-something drug addicts. The main character, Renton, played by a young Ewan McGregor, rejects what he considers the boring straight life and instead chases the endless highs and lows of heroin use, financing his habit with a series of petty crimes. He and his friends manage to kick the habit several times, but always end up using again. Trainspotting is the second film from Danny Boyle, and it features a brilliant early performance from McGregor, as well as Kevin McKidd and Kelly MacDonald. The film does a great job of mixing tragedy and comedy. It has a really frantic, formless, hypnotic visual style that I think helps capture the attraction of drug use and also the feeling of living on the edge of society. It also has just a brilliant soundtrack. So yeah, that's Trainspotting. Did you guys manage to see the film? What did you think?
I watched it recently. So back in the 1990s, I sort of missed the hype of it. Didn't really know it was a thing. So I was 7 at the time. But it was probably the next year when the film Monty was released that I actually found out about Trainspotting. So that's a movie starring Robert Carlyle. And after watching that, I think might have seen like one of his interviews and he talked about filming Trainspotting. But I still didn't watch it until later. I think it was maybe 15. And initially, it wasn't a movie, I didn't like it initially. I might have watched half of it and then gave up. But then it was maybe a few years later, watched the full thing and, enjoyed it that time. And then this is maybe the 4th time that I've watched it. And yeah, it's some of the styles used, like some of the fantasy elements that you see are really effective and quite surprising. It's a great blend of comedy and serious drama, and some of like the subtle things mentioned throughout the movie, like the point where we learn that Mark's stuck in his bedroom and his parents are trying to block access. They want him stuck in there to try and get over the drug addiction. And then they come into the room and say, you have to do something. And they take him to a hospital and take his blood. So that sort of washed over me that I didn't realise they were testing him for HIV until like the recent watch that I've watched just now. So there's a lot of great subtle moments throughout the movie. And yeah, iconic 90s movie and, made a star for a lot of the cast involved. Certainly would recommend the film.
I think it's a really good, very complex film with lots of deeper meanings. The biggest of which I'd say would be Hegelian recognition, with the adding of addiction to that philosophical grounding.
Sorry, I missed that. What recognition?
Hegelian.
Oh, okay.
Recognition. The theory of Hegelian recognition is that people develop their idea of self from others, and ordinarily this would lead to sort of positive feedback loop, which allows you to develop self-esteem, love, and a sense of legal recognition from others. But in Trainspotting, they go the opposite route, using what is misrecognition, where instead of like love or self-esteem or even legal recognition of others, the likes of Lenton and Spud are sort of dragged down into a perpetual state of reliance on each other for recognition, but also self-destruction within each other's that's being created by this dynamic. And the story relates that to the friendship as addiction and how this is addictive to them, even though it's harmful to them, and then connects to heroin. They also go into other addictions such as alcohol or smoking. Alcohol with Begbie, who comedically says, "Why would I put chemicals into my body? That's completely nuts," and then starts drinking. and smoking with what is the character of Scotland, which is their friend. I can't remember his name, but and how he is destroyed by what is stand-in Lenten for classical liberalism, with more so in the book, but even in the film, he directly quotes Thatcher and is shown as first selling heroin to his friend, but inevitably leads to his death, and then the transition between him as the character as the old sort of Scottish identity to this Lenten as a Scottish identity.
Sorry, I missed that. That's a fascinating analysis. Thanks, Jock. I just missed who was the neoliberal stand-in? Which character was that?
Lenten.
Oh, Renton, and he quotes Thatcher. Did you say?
Yeah.
What was that? Which quote was that?
We live in a society.
Oh, right.
But in the books, he straight out calls himself a classical liberal, saying, "I'm a classical liberal.
Right.
I want government out of my drugs."
Mm-hmm.
Also comedically.
Yeah, it is. It's a film that's bursting with ideas, and often that idea will just be given like one sentence or one shot. I mean, even things like, the very sly references to the fact that everyone is addicted to something, and the so-called normal domestic straight life is just as full of reliance on substances, but the fact that they just happen to be legal is all that really matters, like alcohol, but even just, I think Bigby is described as really being addicted to bullying people and causing pain. Renton's mum is addicted to Valium, but even just television and magazines and all these kinds of fantasies that we pump into our eyes and into our mouths, and just all these stimuli in our society to keep us placated and happy, but ultimately in this state of delusional giddiness and compliant. And during the segment in where he goes to London, gets a job as a real estate, I think that's again like he makes the reference that he contradicts the earlier statement about society and says there is no society. There's just exchange and consumption habits. And that's all there is, really. Just this endless series of spectacles to keep us occupied. The film was accused of being glamorizing of drugs. Do you find there's any truth in that?
And well, I guess there is a bit of glamour to it with, some of the, the fantasy elements of the movie. But I think, it's got a nice blend that, there is like glamorizing of drug addiction, but then later we see like all the horrific events that happen to Rent Boy, what he has to do to get over the addiction, and then also the death of Tommy.
The death of Tommy, the death of the baby Dawn, the
yes,
hallucinations that he experiences during the detox are quite horrifying. And they're very at odds with the otherwise sort of light, fun, energetic, exciting tone of the early parts of the movies. I feel like the drug use is always shown to be bad in a way. Like even in the early stages, the fact that their apartment is filthy and the fact that they're, I don't know, just always lying around doing nothing. I don't think it's necessarily glamorized, but I do think the film shows a good reason why they do it. Like logically and illogically. Like illogically they do it, well, I mean, I guess it is logical, but they do it because it feels good. That's the obvious reason. It's just it gives them a rush. But also just in the broader scheme of society, like they don't particularly want to be part of society. They see society as the real zombies, the real brainwash, the real drug addicts, and they just want to live outside of that, I guess. Which has been, a rallying cry since like the 60s. Like all these people who use drugs and romanticize drugs are doing it because one, they want to feel good, but two, they don't want to toe the line. They just want to do what they want to do. But eventually that leads to self-destruction and there's not a particularly good end for any of these characters, so I think it can't really be called romanticizing drugs because everyone ends up pretty miserable or betraying each other. There's no real friendship. There's no real society at the end of it.
Yeah, I think that's a fundamental point, but you could make the argument that it does create a philosophy that would allow you to do drugs. Also, to another degree, it's misrepresentative of what opiates are, because I've been on opiates for a year now, and the actual effect is more sort of numbing feeling rather than euphoria or anything like that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think they show the attraction of numbing, like the character of Tommy, where his girlfriend breaks up with him and he's really depressed and he kind of just doesn't want to feel anything. Like that's the other attraction of drugs, that sometimes you don't want to feel the bad emotions like sadness and fear and loneliness, so drugs can kind of take that away. So not just about the presence of pleasure, it's the negation of bad feelings, physical and mental. One thing that the author of the original book, Welsh, said, which I thought was interesting, was that he had been approached several times by filmmakers who wanted to adapt Trainspotting, but he knocked them back because their interpretation of it was much more serious. He called them sort of po-faced social realism, which were closer to earlier drug movies like The Basketball Diaries, which are these kind of really melodramatic, sort of cautionary tales about the horrors of drugs. Whereas he liked Boyle's interpretation, where he showed the kind of this more diverse experience of what drug taking was like, or it was like the highs and the lows, the energy, the attraction, what actually attracted a lot of these addicts to the lifestyle, and the fact that, as Renton says, we're not idiots. We know it's bad for us, but we do it anyway because we don't want to be told what to do.
There's also the context of the Ravenscraig deal shut off and during the writing of the Trainspotting book, which ended since steel was an intermediate good, and its location to the rail lines Sharif were key supply chain infrastructure. It completely destroyed the economy of Leaf just a year before he was writing it.
Sorry.
The book.
I missed that. The shutting down of the train station destroyed the economy?
No, the Ravenscraig steel plant. It was the biggest steel plant in Western Europe.
Oh, right,
yep. Shut down. And Leaf had up until that point a pretty strong shipbuilding industry. Mm-hmm. But the only railway lines to a steel plant were to the Ravenscraig steel plant. And it was shut down. And you can't really build ships without steel. So destroyed the economy. So there was a response to a big amount of drug use around him during that period.
Yeah, which is a common story all over the world, that like a lot of these industrial societies, once their industries shut down, like all of these, well, young men and women, but a lot of young men were just left without work, so they just turned to drugs. Like a lot of this film is essentially about disaffected working class people who have no real role, no real job to do, so they just do drugs. Not that they don't have the option, like obviously Renton is able to find a job, but like that disaffection and that sort of aimlessness is strong in this film.
There's also the sociological effects of like the loss of community that the trade unions provided up until the point of the rise of patriotism for like the communities of men.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Renton has another great speech. I mean, the film is full of just this amazing narration, but when he gets the job as the real estate agent, he's saying things like, I love all the terminology, the downsizing and subdividing, fragmentation. So he's linking these sort of neoliberal atomization and restructuring of society and the reduction of communities to individuals to this sense of tearing apart and fragmentation and isolation that the individuals of society feel as a result of that new way of doing things. And the fact that, if you're not part of a community, you feel like shit, and like you're going to take drugs. It's a pretty simple formula.
Yeah. I also think the film, as I said earlier, there's a great point about how the communities formed afterwards were much more destructive to the ideas of self of individuals within. So like not all community is good community.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you guys make of the title Trainspotting? Because I mean, there is I think in the original book, which I haven't read, but I read the Wikipedia article about it, there is a reason why the film is called Trainspotting. It's a reference that one of the characters makes to the fact that the drug addicts are always hanging out around the train station. I think they use it as a toilet. and they pretend that they're train spotting to cover for the fact that they're doing something nefarious. But the film itself doesn't make it clear what the title means. What did you guys think?
I think it does, a lot of fans of the film do ask that question, why is it called Trainspotting? So initially when I watched the movie and I thought the same, I'm not seeing anything that, because I thought there would have been one point where you would see a scene where they were train spotting, and that would just be a tiny part of it, but that's not even in the film. But it's sort of, I've never actually thought to look into the reason for it, but actually that makes sense with that description of the book.
Yeah, but even that description is it's a pretty minor interaction in the book, even. So it's surprising that Welsh chose that particular phrase. What do you think, Jock?
Oh, that's why I'm making the connection between the Ravenclaig steel plant, because they do hang around the railway station fairly much in the books, and I thought that maybe that was the connection he was making, but I could be completely there.
Yeah, no, I like that interpretation, the idea that maybe all these young men are just kind of hanging out at the train station because that's what they're conditioned to do. You go to the train station, you go to work at the steel plant, but there's no train coming to take them to the steel plant because the steel plant's shut down. So they just hang around the train station, then they go and get high. It's like there's this disconnection that's represented in the train station, maybe. There's like nowhere to go, I guess would be the metaphor. They're at a train station with nowhere to go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's thinking.
But I did notice, I noticed there was a few scenes at the train station. There was a few cuts between scenes where they would use the sound of a train going past. So it almost conjures up this image of like speed, drugs running down a corridor of the vein, the way a train runs down tracks, the way these characters are always running towards something and never getting there. And the other thing I noticed was the scene where Renton goes to his childhood home. The wallpaper is covered in trains, which I thought was interesting because it's an important room as like the place of childhood where he grew up, but now it's transformed into the place where he's detoxing and seeing all of this nightmarish imagery that he's been running away from for so long, that is finally like catching up to him. The baby Dawn haunting him, and his friend Tommy getting addicted to heroin, and all these sort of all these ghosts kind of coming back to haunt him.
Oh, has anyone watched Trainspotting 2, T2?
No, I haven't seen it. I don't have any great desire to see it, but I heard it is quite good. Like, I think the first movie kind of told a complete story, and I don't really want to see what the outcome of Bigby getting back and causing havoc will be. I feel like I never want to see Bigby again.
It's a great follow-up, I would say.
You enjoyed it? You'd recommend it?
I enjoyed it. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
At the same time, I agree that it's one of those movies that could have been left alone, and it's also not 20 years, but more like 21 years later is when it's released.
I guess part of it is like, I can't imagine any of these characters growing old. They live such self-destructive lives. Like, it just seems like antithetical to the whole message of Trainspotting that they would end up in their 40s. Have you seen it, Jock? Would you recommend T2?
Yeah, I would recommend it. I think it's better than the novel porno that it's based off of. Mm-hmm. Like, it fixes a lot of the narrative problems with it. And it does take away some of like the sexism of Sick Boy from the books, which I would have liked to stay in there. And I might be biased because there's a scene where they rip off an entire group of orange men, and I just quite like the idea of those fascists losing money to a bunch of druggies.
Cool. Any more to say on Trainspotting?
This is more of a sort of Boyle invention that I think added a lot to the film. In the way that he makes a lot of the scenes, like music video scenes, I think creates a sort of critique of popular culture at the time, especially with adding context to the schoolgirl scene and the fetishization of schoolgirls in popular media.
How so?
Well, wasn't it at the same time as Britney Spears' its whole thing?
Oh, right. Yeah, possibly. Yeah, like Spice Girls, Britney Spears, girl bands that were popular in the. I guess that was more maybe late '90s, but yeah, it might have been around in the mid '90s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe
No.
confused.
Oh, I mean, I guess it was definitely something that resonated in that period. Yeah, the
Yeah.
commercialization of the fetishization of youth and female youth,
And I
obviously.
also think it adds to like the idea of a rock star lifestyle and like showing drugs in a sort of darker field than is shown in like normal music videos and musicians, while drugs are shown and this should be pretty bleak, while there's direct scenes from like album covers and stuff like the Beatles, who were drug users, and there's these drug users that don't have the same peace and love kind of thing, but a trail and so forth. So I
Yeah,
think it's a good contrast by Danny Boyle to like set up these scenes.
yeah, and the music is a huge part of the film, and it sort of cycles through a few different eras. Like you've got '70s music with Iggy Pop, and when he moves to London, you hear the sort of '90s techno music. Did you think there was anything interesting about its depiction of Scotland or Edinburgh in particular?
I
Well,
think that we sort of talked about this with the discussion with Bina, as you'll have heard. But we were talking about a lot of the Scottish films. They tend to be like this. Working class people, sometimes unemployed, quite gritty dramas. And this follows a similar vein, whereas it's difficult to see like the other side of that, people that are wealthy, affluent within Scotland, in terms of film, that is.
yeah, like normally like Edinburgh is considered as being sort of like posh by like the
Yes.
other cities, like posh and wealthy, like they're more likely to be taking cocaine than heroin, sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess I
Whereas
haven't.
like
Oh, sorry.
Glasgow would be the one you'd expect to be like the setting for like a heroin.
Yeah, right.
No,
So like Edinburgh is perceived as a more of like a cultural, cosmopolitan place, and then Glasgow is more like a working class place. Is that what you're saying?
yeah,
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting. We get two very different depictions of Edinburgh in this round table. We get Sunshine and Leaf, which is quite, I mean, I guess as you described, quite like middle class and happy and flighty, and Trainspotting, quite a dark, decaying atmosphere. Yeah, I guess I haven't seen enough Scottish films to think of like middle class kind of Scottish film. But yeah, Sunshine and Leaf portrays that perspective. But I guess it's just often not as interesting when people are really comfortable and their biggest problem is like who they're sleeping with. Um, yeah, I guess there are a few specifically Scottish things. Like there is a bit of a moment where they get off heroin and they're trying to go out and live life to the fullest, and Tommy takes them out to the great outdoors, as he calls it, and they're all drinking and smoking and can't be bothered walking out to the mountains and say, this is horrible. Scotland doesn't fill us with patriotism. Renton just has a great speech about like, there's nothing proud about being Scottish. It's the lowest of the low. We were colonized by effete assholes. And then Sick Boy is often giving this running commentary on Sean Connery as this kind of idealized Scottish male. But that's all I can think
that's what
of.
I think of porno, because like it goes into like how he sort of like developed like quite strong sexist attitudes. There's a bit of that in Trainspotting too, but it's much stronger in the book porno.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my yeah, my partner watched the film with me, and she liked it a lot, but she was put off by the fact that there was no real female characters in it. Like, if there were a few female characters, but they have very few lines, and it was mostly childish males running around causing havoc. That kind of turned her off. But she loved the music and psychedelic hallucinatory scenes.